Awesome. So before we talk about the many deep and exciting things that you're doing now and the reason why you and I met a few years ago, I want to bring it back way back to when you were graduating college and you were majoring in strategic communications and marketing. And then, so before you got into any of your first jobs, for my audience who wonder a lot about career trajectories and people who are self-conscious about their own trajectories and bouncing from job to job and trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, what was your attitude all the way back, looking back then, not knowing how clear you'd be on your career now and your purpose now? What was your mindset like and attitude like when you graduated college about your career?
Yeah, great question. Well, dating back to college, I always knew I wanted to get into sports in some capacity, and it's kind of a different tune than my current career. But I was always super passionate about sports. My stepmom had worked in a couple athletic departments at Georgia Tech and University of Virginia, and we just grew up going to college sports games in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I grew up. And I just loved the camaraderie. I loved the passion, the energy, and I loved how collaborative sports were. And so I always knew that was the path that I wanted to explore at the very least. And having studied strategic communications and business administration at Elon, I figured there was some transferable elements that I had learned there into the sports realm. I ended up getting an internship with the Atlantic Coast Conference as a game day operations intern during a football season my senior year of college. And that honestly really springboarded my further interest into the sports world, because it was super hands-on and it kind of validated all of my preconceived notions about how collaborative sports are. Just the teamwork element really drew me to it. And so that internship was essentially my launch pad into the sports world. And I parlayed that internship with my first job at a college was with the Atlantic Coast Conference's digital network in Charlotte, North Carolina, just as a marketing assistant for them, unpaid. I had to kind of work my way up the ladder there. But I guess my advice to someone who doesn't necessarily know what they want to do in their lives, especially at the end of college. Like, I had so many friends that didn't know what the hell they wanted to do. And, I didn't necessarily know exactly what I wanted to be my entire life. And I think a lot of people fall into that corner to some degree. I mean, you have a small cohort of folks that know they want to be a doctor or a lawyer, and, they're fully committed to that throughout their entire college career. But for me personally, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And so just getting my hands dirty, jumping on an internship and trying something new was honestly one of the best experiences of my life, because it taught me, that you have to explore in order to succeed and in order to find yourself to some degree. So I would encourage anyone to try an internship, even if it's unpaid. I know times are tough financially these days, but you got to get your hands dirty in order to find yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you just dropped so many perfect bumper sticker quotes.
I'm full of them, man.
I love it. I love it. If you just spend the next hour dropping those quotes, that will be so valuable for people.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I'm full of them. I think that's the author in me. My dad was a thespian, so I think that's where I get it from.
Amazing. Well, I love it, because the two main ones that you just said, which was you have to explore in order to succeed, and then you have to get your hands dirty in order to find yourself. And I couldn't agree more, especially in the mental health world, that there's so much exploration and having to accept the fact that it's messy to get onto the other side of success, but also, and especially in my world, finding yourself, finding who you are, what you want out of life.
100%. And it's so much easier said than done, especially in the entrepreneurial world. Like, everyone says you got to take a risk, in order to figure out what you're good at, what you're not good at. But there's so many different factors that that go into that decision of leaping into, a startup or launching your own business. There's so many risks and so many factors that you really do need a support system and a strong backing in order to make that leap of faith. But yeah, man, you said it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You just said even more. That's awesome. Yeah, that's like the whole leap of faith piece too. This is great. I'm going to pull so many quotes from this.
I love
It's
it.
going to be awesome. Thank
Let's
you.
do it. Yeah. Good stuff.
um,
It's only been 5 minutes too.
I know, exactly. It was just a great episode. So we'll just end it there.
Perfect. Got our audio bit.
Yeah, exactly. But I do love what you said about how the thing that really drove you, other than just the overall category of sports, was the passion and collaboration piece. And I want to ask you more about that, but it has to do with your current business. And so why don't we just fast forward to talk about Thropic? And I guess what I'll ask first, because I do want you to go into the story of how it started. We won't do that quite yet. But what I think I'll ask first is, because you had multiple jobs in the sports world, in the communications realm, what all of a sudden, and this may actually be the reason why you started it anyways, you might have to tell the story no matter what, but why were you all of a sudden appealed to entrepreneurship?
I guess I'd always loved building things or creating things from scratch, whether it was a piece of artwork, scribbling something. At all of my previous jobs, including in the sports world, I had always been interested in creating mobile apps. And I'll start with my first job with the ACC Digital Network. I was a marketing assistant under this guy, Trey Walters, who was, my first mentor and first manager in my career. And he was head of new media at the Atlantic Coast Conference. And we ended up working on a couple gaming mobile applications together, one of which was kind of a simple, like pop a shot ACC basketball mobile app that fans would play at, marketing activations before the ACC tournament or big time championship games or something of that nature. And I was involved kind of from 0 to 1 throughout that entire process, beta testing, coming up with new features, new ideas, working with the development team on fleshing out, kind of the roadmap, product roadmap, and just being hands-on from start to finish really got me interested in product development. And so I think part of it was that experience so early on in my career, combined with my creative side. So I mentioned my father was an actor. He's an artist, an author, truly a Renaissance man. And then my mother was a musician. She was a bass player for the Go-Go's in the 70s in the punk rock scene in LA.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, so I certainly have like a strong creative side of my genes. I don't know what happened because I'm not a good artist or a musician, but regardless, I think some of those genetics are transferable to this, entrepreneurial world from a creative standpoint. So anyways, between my creative side and, that first experience of developing a couple mobile apps, that really got me interested in kind of creating my own thing. And that's essentially where Thropic started from, was an idea I had to incentivize younger people to give back more through this kind of reward system, gamified reward system as a mobile app that would essentially reward you with points if you donated or if you volunteered or participated in a charity event. And the more points you earned, you could unlock certain rewards along the way from like corporate partners or experiences or whatever it may be. So my initial idea for Thropic was kind of that gamified mobile app. And so it all just kind of comes full circle. If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. And I don't know, I mean, we'll get to, how you and I met in a minute, but I don't know if I knew the gamified aspect of it when you started Thropic, which is why in my mind, it was going from like sports marketing just to philanthropy, which in a lot of people's mind is just a stark pivot.
Yeah, super stark. No, for sure. I think from my perspective, and this is stemming from participating in a few charity events in my early 20s, as we've talked about, like I noticed that a lot of nonprofits were struggling to reach people our age, and younger people were struggling to find the causes that they cared about. And it just felt like a very archaic system. And so my initial
Mm,
idea with Tropic was to kind of modernize it in a way, flip the script, and try to create a system that would reward and incentivize younger people to get more involved. So that's essentially where Tropic started. And um, we have elements of that mission still, but it's, it's certainly a stark contrast, like you said.
right. But I can totally see, I love how you described the creative aspect, but you also already had experience in creating something from scratch that was some kind of product that was actually usable. It's not just you doing doodles or doing art and like maybe
Right.
selling it at some point. It was like this very like a practical app. So I can see how that could easily lead into, why don't we create a product that actually is like its standalone business model?
Absolutely. And that's a good segue into, I feel like, why the NFT space is, not to jump the gun here, but why a lot of these
We can jump however you want.
okay,
Go
perfect.
ahead.
Why a lot of these NFT projects are so popular, because well, one, the community value, as we've spoken about. I think having a community behind these projects that feels like they're part of the process when the project actually goes live and gains some success and traction, those community members feel like they were part of that success. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs and, coworkers and people that are early on at startups feel once their product or idea kind of takes off to some degree, or even if it doesn't, they feel like they were part of something tangible, something that they created from scratch. And I think a lot of people in life, especially a lot of younger people these days, that's what they're striving for.
Mhm.
There's so many resources at our disposal these days that I know millennials and younger people, or people across the board, are encouraged to explore their own possibilities. And we have so many amazing resources that those possibilities are possible, or are plausible these days.
Sure.
Anyways, I'm ranting, but
No, 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 no. It makes sense, especially because you've already conveyed that your goal with Thropic is to modernize an archaic system.
correct.
And
Yeah,
so all the technological possibilities are wild right now, which is what you're delving into.
exactly. Yeah. And I just don't know if a lot of these startups would have been possible 10 years ago, even, just given
Mm.
how immediate information is, and how immediate developers and resources are these days. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is. So before we go down more of that crypto and NFT route, let's ground this with how everything got started, because the reason why you and I even know each other is because a mutual friend who I also worked with in mental health, a psychiatric hospital, Emily, introduced us. And she introduced us right in the beginning of Thropic, when, as I understood it at the time, there was so much more of a mental health focus to the causes that people were donating to. And obviously, since then, you ballooned it to so many different causes, so many different companies and opportunities. And so, other than the philanthropy piece, would you mind sharing a story of why this even got started and why it started as a mental health focused thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. As I always share with anyone I speak to about Thropic, just like any company or new product or idea, it's always important to share your why. Um, Everyone has one. Every company has one, and that's what people buy into. They're not going to buy the what of your product; they're going to buy the why. And so, I always share my why, not to play a sympathy card or to pull at anyone's heartstrings, but because I think it's important to showcase what Thropic is all about at its core, and what fuels me every day. And so I'm happy to share, because I think it's super important and crucial to show kind of, what we're all about here. So fast forward back to June of 2014. I just graduated from Elon University, was back home for about a month taking care of my mother, my single mother, who was dealing with anxiety and depression at the time. And I was an only child, and so I was kind of left to pick up the pieces. And unfortunately, one day I was over at my father's house, and I went back to my mom's house to pick up some clothes, and I noticed that all the blinds were drawn, and our family dachshund Stella was kind of whimpering at the back door when I opened the door. And as if some sort of like energy took a hold of me, but I felt almost pulled up to my mother's bedroom for whatever reason. And unfortunately, I discovered her after she had taken her own life. And needless to say, incredibly traumatizing experience, for anyone, especially a 21-year-old kid with no clear career path. And my entire world was flipped upside down in that moment. And I remember feeling helpless, scared, traumatized. And I just sprinted out of the house, called my dad, called the cops. And that was truly kind of a life-defining moment for me. And I felt like in that moment, I really had two options. I could either let that horrible experience define me negatively for the rest of my life, or I could turn that horrific experience into something positive. And I chose the latter, because I didn't want to, sulk the rest of my life and use that as an excuse to be a piece of shit. And so, but obviously incredibly difficult situation. I really struggled with it for years. And I mean, I still do struggle with it. Let's be honest. I mean, it's been almost 8 years this June. And not a day goes by that I don't think about it when I close my eyes to go to sleep at night. And it's tough, but the first few years were certainly the toughest. At some points, I just felt like I was kind of floating through life. And honestly, I think the biggest thing I struggled with, my biggest pain point was not being able to relate to anyone that I knew that had gone through a similar experience like that. Ironically, my mother's father, my grandfather, he had discovered his brother after his brother committed suicide, but no one ever spoke about it. And he kind of shoved those emotions down, and I didn't feel comfortable talking to him about it, especially considering it was his daughter this time around. And so to me, I didn't really have anyone to speak to. And it wasn't until I moved up to Boston, and I one day out of the blue did a little research online and looked up, nonprofits doing suicide prevention or mental health nonprofits. And I found this really amazing organization called Samaritan's Hope out of Boston. And they do some incredible life-saving work around Massachusetts and some parts of New England. And I found that they were doing a 5K one September day, and I think this was 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And I just randomly decided to go to this 5K, and honestly, it was one of the best decisions of my life. Like crossing that finish line, being surrounded by other folks who understood my pain and understood my experience, and everyone was super emotional around me, and it brought me to tears because I felt like I was part of a core community that got it and didn't really judge me for it. And so that experience really springboarded my interest into the philanthropy space, and I got more involved with Samaritans, got more involved with other local grassroots nonprofits that specialized in mental health and suicide prevention, and participated in workshops, 5K committees, you name it, charity events. And the more I got involved, the more I realized how kind of old school and archaic these nonprofits operate. And similar to how I struggled to find, a cause and a charity that was close to me, I felt like these nonprofits were missing some sort of connection to younger demographics in our generation for a variety of different reasons. But I think the main one was that a lot of the current day fundraising methodologies that these nonprofits are using are just very, very archaic and outdated. And I wanted to, help them stay with the times and help them flip the script to some degree. And so with that in mind, I launched Thropic as a way, one, to help younger people discover the causes that they cared about by creating some sort of like incentivized reward system that I talked about earlier, but also to help nonprofits, kind of lower the barrier to entry to targeting and acquiring a younger donor, which is a very a very holistic mission, but our mission still remains the same, even though we've pivoted into crypto and blockchain. But anyways, that's Thropic's core mission. That's my why, and that's what fuels us every day.
Wow. Thank you for going into all the detail. I really, really appreciate your comfort and your vulnerability and your transparency with that. Granted, I know you've had to share that story a lot, but the pain's still there. The pain doesn't leave.
Nope.
Yeah, absolutely
not. It helps to talk about it, even for the 100th time that I've spoken about it, or if not more. It always feels good to get it off your chest. And compared to how my grandfather dealt with his brother's suicide, I didn't feel like it was healthy to keep my emotions shoved down any longer. And part of speaking my why and speaking my truth was almost therapeutic for me personally, and almost liberating. So I encourage anyone that goes through a traumatic experience to not keep it bottled up. You gotta let that shit out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you saw firsthand, just by doing that 5K, the power of some version of expressing it. You didn't even need
100%.
You didn't even need to sit there and you probably didn't have to sit there and share your story with everybody in like a support group kind of vibe, but you just knew that everybody was there. Even though running was the outlet, you knew that everybody was there for the same reason.
100%, man. And ever since I did that first 5K by myself, it grew and it snowballed. And the following year we had probably 10 people that participated with me, and then the year after that we had close to 50. We ended up raising like 30 grand for the Samaritans 5K as Thropic's inaugural team. And just being able to see kind of that and feel that impact and see that like community-based change, like that meant everything to me. And there was a lot of people like Emily and other folks early on who were super supportive that I had never met before. And just being able to, again, see that level of impact that we started was probably the coolest part of the whole journey so far.
Yeah, by far the most gratifying when it's that concrete, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I miss that. I miss the charity events, the in-person feelings. Everything's so virtual these days, but
yeah, which actually leads me into my next question, which is because of the fact that you made your own crypto coin, the Thropic coin, and now, whether I'm allowed to say this or not, you're going to be launching like your own NFT series, everything that's specific to Thropic, not exchanging or buying or dealing with other people's NFTs. So you have your own. As your role as this creative entrepreneur continues to grow into the kind of like CEO or just leader of a bunch of people, as well as a leader not only of a business and a philanthropic business, which is hard enough as it is, but also basically a tech business. And everything you're doing is not only virtual, like in your virtual meetings, but everything you're doing is just tech talk
Yeah.
and digital and nitty gritty and data driven and all that. So how do you, if you do, how do you maintain the human impact element of all of this? Because the human element is what drove and started the entire train to begin with.
Yeah, great question. And it's tough. I mean, as you know, we started off as more of a grassroots event marketing type company, and we were really hands-on with charity events and helping some of our nonprofit partners throw more modern charity events that would align with millennial mentality to some degree. And then obviously COVID hit and we couldn't do in-person events any longer, and we had to help our partners make that transition to more virtual means, which was no easy task. And as you and I'm sure the rest of the world feels a little Zoom fatigue, and we're 2.5, however many, or 2 years into this pandemic, and feels like the world has shifted towards a more virtual hybrid model to some degree. And I was actually talking to my uncle last night, who runs his own creative company out here in LA, and he said that they just opened their office up for the first time in 2 years this past Monday, and it was like pulling teeth to get his employees to come to the grand opening, which was ironic because you would think after all this time people would be almost refreshed to feel some sort of personal connection to their colleagues. But it speaks to kind of this new hybrid model that we're experiencing now. But to answer your question, it's been difficult. I mean, we've shifted our entire focus to be a donor software platform, which by pure definition, we're a tech company and we operate like a tech company, and especially in the blockchain space, it's super techy and you really get into the technical weeds, most days. And it's a little exhausting sometimes. And sometimes I feel like we might lose sight of the bigger picture and the long-term mission of why we all started Thropic to begin with, because of how technical and how business oriented it gets. And so actually the other day, as part of our team meeting that we do every week, we brought on, with the help of our new executive director, Michelle, she brought on her old business partner, this guy, Mike Rosenfeld, who is by definition a life coach to a bunch of sports athletes and CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And he was a motivational speaker, and he kind of encouraged everyone to speak to their why and speak to why they started with Thropic and what drove them to the mission. And it was just very refreshing to kind of take the business side of it out of a team meeting and focus more on the human element. And it felt like a very solid team bonding experience. So even though it was still hosted virtually, it felt like we all got back on the same page to some degree. And so there's little things here and there that you can do to kind of reestablish that human element. But it's tough these days, man. As you know, like I would much rather be having this conversation in person, because you can pick up
totally
on body language and energy. And I think that's why, going back to the whole sports world, I think that's why people are drawn to going to sports games and not going to sports games on, an Oculus or a VR set, because you go to feel that energy and to feel the crowd and the presence. And, I think that's what we're missing with these online charity events, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. And so even though I know a little bit behind the scenes of your goals with the NFT stuff, along that line of the human experience aspect, what are you hoping that, like what human experience result do you hope that all of this digital interaction and buying your NFT will lead to for the donors and for the causes or the charities or the companies?
Yeah, it's another great question. And it's tough. It's tricky in this space because there's a lot of skepticism behind decentralized finance and crypto and NFTs in general. because I think it's perceived as a money grab, greedy type space. And there's been cases of scams and frauds and rug pulls, as they call it, in this space, where people pump up a project and then just dump all the assets to make a quick buck. And so from a charity's perspective, I think they're hesitant to get into this space because of that kind of fraud narrative that is kind of looming over a lot of these projects. Now, where we come in, and this is where our charitable footprint that we've established over the years comes in, it gives us a level of credibility that a lot of these charity projects within the blockchain space are missing. Maybe I'm biased, but we've always been true to our mission, and we have countless amounts of money donated and countless charity partners that can attest to that, which to me should hold a lot of weight in this space. But again, there's always a few bad apples that spoil the tree. But in terms of NFTs, charities in particular are looking at Thropic to serve as their blockchain expert or their guardrails to bridge over to this space, because they see the opportunity here. They see people making ungodly amounts of money. And from their perspective, they're like, why can't we get in on the fun and carve out a slice of this market, right? But again, there's a level of skepticism. There's a level of education that they need to get across to their community and their networks, because it's such a novel and complex industry for newcomers, So anyways, the opportunity is there, but how do we leverage kind of the pure nature and pure mission of these charities in an effective and real world way through the use of NFTs? I think people's biggest questions that don't understand NFTs and don't understand crypto is, what's the point? Like, why do these things increase in value over some other things? Like, what's the utility? Like, what's the real world application used to these digital assets? And they're not wrong. Utility is certainly the most important thing in this space. And the projects that stand the test of time have some sort of form of long-term utility to their digital assets. For example, in the NFT space, the Bored Ape Yacht Club and CryptoPunks, those are the most popular projects in the NFT space, right? The reason they're so popular is, one, they do an amazing job of galvanizing a community. Like, community engagement and community value is incredibly, incredibly important in this space. And so from a charity's perspective, that completely aligns with their mission and falls under their umbrella, because all of these charities have a community established, right? Which goes back to my why I got involved with Samaritans, because I felt like I was part of a community. Same thing in the NFT space. A lot of people they're lacking that, that sense of community, even if it's not related to a certain cause or a traumatic experience. They just want to feel like they're part of a collaborative team. Tying back to sports and everything I talked about earlier, it all comes full circle. But my point is, the reason why a lot of these NFT projects are so popular is because they do such a good job of driving that community engagement. And their community members basically do the marketing on behalf of the project, and the serve as like ambassadors to some degree, which is what I served for Samaritans and looped a lot of people in my network in. So it all kind of comes full circle. And that's the reason why I think charities and NFTs can kind of collaborate and mesh together, within this new realm, because of the community value. Now, in terms of the pieces of artwork and like the digital assets themselves as NFTs, that gets a little tricky, because, a lot of these nonprofits have creative assets already in their back pocket. Now, how do they leverage those as cool or hip or modern NFT collections? That gets a little difficult, but they're going back to the utility factor. If there's some sort of tangible incentive or tangible utility tied to each of these NFTs, that goes such a long way in this space. And I'll give you an example of that. We're working with this wildlife organization called the Gorilla Foundation. And they have, a pack of real life gorillas. And they have all of these amazing data points around these endangered species that they want to bring to life through the use of NFTs, right? So say that we digitize one of their gorillas named Steve, and we create an NFT version of Steve the gorilla. Whoever purchases that NFT of Steve the gorilla will receive real-time updates about what the real life Steve the gorilla is up to, whether if it's his birthday, what he ate for dinner, what his pack is doing that day. So from there, they're almost seeing how their money is being used for good. Like it's kind of a modern donor follow-up system to some degree.
Sure.
And so in that case, in that particular instance, there's immediate utility and there's immediate impact that the NFT consumer is seeing in real time. And so between utility and community value, I think that's why charities and NFTs can coexist.
Mhm. That's awesome. I love that example of the Gorilla Foundation. I think I've told you this this story before, but the reason why that resonates as such a powerful example is that I used to volunteer for the Millennium Elephant Foundation in Sri Lanka. And what was really cool, I think it was even before I actually went, someone knew that I was interested in elephants, and like someone had donated to some elephant trust, I believe in Africa. It might have been the Sheldrick Trust, and basically sponsored an elephant in my name. And like that was a gift for me for like Christmas or birthday or something. And I thought that was infinitely cooler than, and like, because I was able to be like, oh, this elephant, I got a picture of the elephant. It has a name. I even got a little bit of its like behavior, what its personality is like. I didn't get real-time updates whatsoever. I got just like a picture in this little frame and like some information. But even that was super cool because it's like, oh, there's this tangible thing that I am now connected with through a donation experience.
Exactly. And that's honestly the sentiment we're trying to bottle up and use with NFTs. I mean, to your point, Taylor, like younger people our age care about transparency. We care about long-term impact of how our money is being used for good. Like we don't want to just blindly donate to a charity and not see where the funds are going. Like we want to see exactly where those funds are going and how it's being used for good. And so for that example that you just used, I mean, taking that exact model and migrating it over to the NFT space is exactly what we're trying to do here to provide that level of transparency. So you nailed it.
I love it. Yeah, it's like a combo of transparency, but also an ongoing real life experience.
Yeah.
Because yeah, to your point, I live in New York City. Like there are countless people on the street corner with a clipboard who are trying to ask you to donate to some kind of cause. They have no idea what your life is like. They have no idea if you'd ever imagine about caring about what that cause is,
right,
what have you. But so many of us just are bothered by them and we walk by. The empath in me feels badly, but at the same time, I know that if I write a check, I have no idea where that check is going.
For sure. Speaking of which, just piggybacking off of that point, when I lived in Boston, I think this was about a year ago, maybe longer, I was on a run one day and someone with a clipboard in the street stopped me. And I'm a nice, approachable guy and sometimes too approachable, but I took the conversation and, she convinced me to sponsor a child in China. It was called, I think it was Plan International. And I signed up fairly blindly on the spot and, got charged for it every month, $35 every month. And it was kind of like a passive way of generating impact. But, every probably 6 months or so, they would send me a letter from the child that I was sponsoring, handwritten letter. And that was cool to receive. But it was every so often, and it was kind of never at the top of my mind until I received that letter in person. Now, if we could replicate that model a little more consistently on a digital basis, I think that'd be way more powerful than receiving like hard mail, because again, it's just a little outdated, but
Mhm.
there's certain avenues that we could explore in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with you. So, I mean, firstly, I'll just say that I'll be transparent. I've never had much interest in philanthropy. I'm interested in certain causes, mental health causes, and certainly the Elephant Foundation and everything. So there are certain causes that I want to be philanthropic with, but philanthropy and just fundraising things and all that has always been this category of business that has just been very separate from me. And so entrepreneur to
You're not the only
entrepreneur,
one. Yeah.
well, yeah, for sure. Thank goodness. Yeah, I'm not alone. But entrepreneur to entrepreneur, I'm so excited for you to see what creative possibilities there are of connecting your donors to the charities. Because like another image that comes to mind, of course, is like the those really like sob story advertisements that come on television where you call and donate to like help children somewhere, but like you still don't know where your money's going, so there's a whole lot of just disconnect between what your real impact is, like the human connection is, and what you're
Yep.
actually donating money to.
100%. Like the Sarah McLachlan
That's who it was.
SPCA
Yeah,
commercials.
I was trying to come up with her name, and I was like,
Man,
oh.
I feel like whenever those commercials come on, people just turn the channel because it's way too sad. But I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, the
they
dogs too. Oh my
yeah.
God.
At least you see exactly where your money's going there. But geez, man, talk about
Yeah.
playing your heartstrings.
Yeah, totally. So I'm even though you don't you and you're doing all of it, but even though you don't even know what it's going to look like yet, just that human connection piece, or just
Oh yeah,
connecting people in a more interactive, real, concrete, tangible way to a charity is just so cool that that's
for
even a
sure.
thing.
I know it's awesome to see. Did I give you the Trippy Bunny Tribe example at one point?
Yes.
I'd love to share that example if that works, unless you had a
Sure.
specific
No,
question.
no, no. I'll hold my questions. Go ahead.
All right, I just feel like that like validates what we're trying to do, within the NFT realm. So back in September of 2021, we collaborated with a group called the Trippy Bunny Tribe, and it was this popular NFT group with a bunch of like crypto experts as part of the team that were super popular on Twitter, had a strong backing, strong following. Um, and these guys launched this NFT project called the Trippy Bunny Tribe, and these psychedelic bunnies as NFTs, smoking pot, you name it. It sounds ridiculous on paper, but they did such a good job of galvanizing the community pre-launch, so that as soon as they launched the project and these NFTs dropped, they sold out in 12 seconds, about 1,100 of these NFTs. But the kicker is they wanted all of the sales proceeds to go back to suicide prevention as part of Suicide Prevention Day back in September, which for me, just being involved in that was obviously very personal and hit home, and was really cool to just be a small part of that. But the thing was, these guys at Trippy Bunny, um, amazing hearts that they had to donate that much money to charity, but they didn't necessarily know which charity partner to donate the funds to, nor did they know how to facilitate the donation. And so they looked at us at Thropic to find them and vet them the right charity partner, and to actually, make the donation on their behalf. We ended up donating the money to one of our longstanding partners, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And as I mentioned, these guys sold their project out in 12 seconds, and they ended up raising $250,000 for charity. And it all went to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which
Wow.
was incredible, again, just to facilitate that type of activation. But the coolest part was, beyond just how much money they raised for AFSP, was the level of engagement that AFSP received on their thank you tweet to the Trippy Bunny Tribe community. They said it was the most engagement they've received on a tweet ever. And it kind of goes to show you the level of appetite within the crypto space in the NFT community for leveraging these digital assets for social good. And so that, to me, that just validated from both ends why Dropic's platform needs to exist in order to streamline that donation process for both parties, but
Mhm.
also, again, the level of thirst within this space for using this technology for good. So that was just a cool example I wanted to share.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a perfect illustration of what you're going for,
Yeah,
that there's interaction back and forth. It's not just submitting money and the company being like, cool, thanks. And there's just
right.
zero engagement from there.
Right.
It's
And it's such a unique way for these nonprofits to, one, fundraise, obviously, but also to get in front of a whole new wave of younger people. Because let's see, 77% of crypto asset users worldwide are under the age of 45. So this is really a space dominated by millennials and younger people. And so they can get in front of a whole new wave of people within this space.
sure, sure. And especially if whether or not the NFT and crypto thing really does completely take over the world and decentralize all finances and everything is going to be on the blockchain at a certain point, no matter whether or not that happens,
Right.
at least you are creating, at least this is an avenue just for not only a transaction of donation, but of a next level interaction and human experience that people can have.
100%. And whether you like to believe in NFTs or not, there's a lot of these meme projects out there that I'm not a believer in necessarily, but the technology checks out. Like the reason we pivoted into blockchain was because the technology is incredible. It's powerful. It works, and it checks off all of the boxes that a younger donor is looking for. So yeah, you said it, man.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So then, bringing it back to you a little more selfishly, intentionally, you know, what's cool in the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned how entrepreneurship came because you love creating things from scratch and that whole product development way that your mind works. And then the philanthropy piece makes total sense because of how you wanted to be part of a community of like-minded people that could support each other and that cared about a specific type of mission or service, or to give back in a certain way. And so, when I coach clients and I'm helping them design what their selfish and their selfless purposes are in life, because we have to have both as human beings. We need the selfish drive and we need to feel like we're contributing to something. So for you, do you feel like throughout your entire entrepreneurial career, that selfish drive of, ooh, I get to keep creating something, I get to be creative and artistic, versus the philanthropic side, which is the selfless, let's build a community around this, let's have an impact. Do you feel like those have equally and consistently motivated you through all of this, or has there been some times where it's more so on the philanthropy side or more so on the selfish side?
Yeah. Another great question. I think early on, what really drove me and drove us was more so on the philanthropy side of things. Just especially the in-person charity events, being able to see our impact in real time was incredibly inspiring and powerful. And that really drove me early on. And then, as we dove into more of the business development weeds and fleshed out a business model and, tried to scale the business and grow, and it got a little more, selfishly business oriented, because the way I saw it, in order to help more people in the long run, we had to make some money ourselves and keep the lights on.
Mm,
But at a certain point, sometimes we might lose sight of that core mission of why we started Thropic in the first place. And I personally love the ideation creation process more so than anything. And when it feels like we're getting a little stagnant in that regard, that's when I get antsy personally. Because I love creating. But at the same time, when you're running a business, you need to keep it hyper focused and targeted and structured around one idea and stick with one lane and run with it.
mm,
Because, you know, the best way I can put it is, a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, we try to throw a lot of shit at the wall until something sticks. And until something sticks, you're just going to keep iterating. And again, the ideation process is the most exciting part. But I would encourage everyone to, again, stick with one lane and run with it and test it out first before moving on to the next shiny object. And that's a lesson that I've had to learn the hard way as well. Because listen, the business side of things isn't the most exciting, all the legal docs, onboarding investors, shareholders, building your team, like the nitty gritty stuff isn't why entrepreneurs get into this space, but it's all super important. So with all that being said, I, selfishly, to some degree, we have to focus on the business side of things in order to help people in the long run. But at the same time, we can't lose sight of our mission of why we started this. So it's tough, man.
No, you're exactly right. And there's no judgment to the fact that you need to be selfish sometimes, because you're still ultimately serving the mission. Right. And you can't be 100% selfish and have a business that's going to last, because then you're neglecting who you're actually serving. So no, I just like asking that question of entrepreneurs because it always changes, and you're doing what you need to do, or you're focusing on what you have to focus on based on how the dominoes are laid out.
Yeah, 100%. Well said.
Well, since it's very clear throughout all of this conversation that you have a very, very humanitarian bend to your technology company, your software platform. As a last question, what I love to ask, and for those of you who have not listened to this podcast yet before, the context of this last question that I ask every guest is that my godfather was a renowned pediatrician, and he was heavily involved with teaching other medical students about, best practices, ethics, and just bringing the human element to science and medicine. And so he would host events at his house, and there was a doctor who came to speak to a bunch of these med students, and the med students were asking a bunch of nitty gritty technical, like right or wrong questions about medicine and whatever they were talking about. And the doctor just stopped them all and asked, define or find your definition of a good life, and then build your medical practice based on that. So you're always making decisions from a place of humanity or empathy or what have you, and let that direct what you've learned in the textbooks. And so, right, it's awesome. I love that. And my godfather dropped that on me just a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh my God, what? So Max, for you, because it's very clear how humanitarian and how much you care about communities and galvanizing impact. What is your definition of a good life?
Oof, that is a loaded question. I would say a simple one where I'm at peace with myself. Just to provide a little color there, I've found that I'm the most happy in my life when I'm grounded in the moment and feeling zero regret, right? I'll give you an example of this because that sounds super holistic, right? But yesterday, actually, ironically, I was getting a haircut at this barber shop here in Manhattan Beach, run by this Italian family for the last 80 years. And this barber shop is straight out of the 1950s. It's super old school. I felt like it was kind of a blast from the past kind of experience. Anyways, there's this one barber there who cut my hair. His name is Antonio. He's, creeping up into his late 80s, straight out of Naples, speaks very broken English. But I got to talking to Antonio, and I asked him, because he was super, super chippy and very outgoing, very happy, and just kind of was resonating this positive energy. And I asked him, like how long he had been cutting hair, and he said for 31 years. And so I asked him how he remained so happy after doing the same job for over 3 decades. And I'll never forget this. He looked around and just pointed to his shop and he goes, "Because I have all of this." Now, keep in mind,
Mm.
again, this barbershop, it's like a 3-chair barbershop straight out of the 1950s. Very simple, right? But his point was, why would I need anything more in life when I have everything I need right here? And he couldn't have been a happier man. And in the moment, I was almost envious of how simplistic yet fulfilling his life appeared to be. And I feel like in America in particular, and especially in the startup world, we live in such a competitive vortex. Like everyone is always trying to gain an edge on someone else, right? That we forget to take a step back sometimes and truly live in the moment. And just sitting in that barber shop, I felt like I was living in the moment, and life felt very simple. And to me, a good life was the life Antonio was living, a simple one,
Mm.
but he had everything he needed there. So that to me was, really powerful.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome. I love that story of Antonio too. That's so
Yeah, man.
cool.
He was I love this guy. Definitely be going back there. And he cuts a mean hair too.
Well, I don't know because you're wearing a hat right now, but
I got pretty bad hat hair today, or else.
it's all right. Well, yeah, I mean, kidding aside, I love the simplicity and having what you need. But you started off that answer by saying that that's what brings peace, and just to feel at peace with the simplified life where you have what you need. I love it.
Yeah, and that kind of stems back to my heritage. So I was actually born in France myself, and lived there for 10 months when I was a baby before we moved to Seattle.
Mm.
But my grandparents still live in the south of France, and I was actually with my uncle last night, who just went out to France to visit them a couple weeks ago, along with my cousin. And I was talking to my cousin about the trip, and he was just harping on how relaxed the lifestyle over there is. Granted, he's hanging out with some old folks in their 90s who don't have much going on, but just in general, he was saying the laissez-faire attitude in France was so different than what we experience here. And again, I was fairly envious of that sentiment. So I
Yeah,
just I just wish we would slow things down every once in a while.
absolutely. I've read that same thing about Italy too,
Yeah.
about and like people's work days in Italy. And you're in LA and I'm in New York City, and you and I are like, what? Oh my,
Yeah.
what? That's a life?
And granted, we're probably a little more productive, faster paced over here, but to find that perfect hybrid, man, that's to me, that's a good life.
Yeah, the harmony. I
Yeah,
love it.
exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Max, for sharing everything that you have today. I mean, I'll put all the links afterwards. I know you have to head out, but I'll put all the links in the show notes. Is there a specific way that you want people to engage with you right now?
Um, you mean terms like where to find us?
Yeah. Yeah. The best way, whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, give us a follow on Twitter at Thropic, on Instagram at thropic.hq, and then feel free to check out our website thropic.io, and you can sign up on our newsletter there.
Awesome. I love it. So that everybody can hear about the NFT drop when it comes.
Absolutely, yeah. I got to get front in line for that.
Yep. I love it. Well, Max, again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your incredibly busy tech company schedule.
Always have time for you, man. Seriously, appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to see it come to life.
Thank you. Likewise. All right. We'll talk soon.
All right, Taylor. Thanks, man.